Welcome to Neurosalience, the OHBM podcast. Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Neurosalience. This is a podcast brought to you by OHBM, the Organisation for Human Brain Mapping, where we feature discussions with brain scientists from around the world, including discussions of functional and structural neuroimaging, clinical applications, methods and challenges in the field, and so on. If you're new to the podcast, fantastic, welcome, well done for finding us. If not, welcome back, and you may notice that there are a few differences around here. First of all, I am not Peter Bandettini, your regular host for the podcast, nor am I Rachel Stickland, the other voice you may have heard regularly on these podcasts. My name is Alfie Wearn. I'm a postdoc at McGill University, and I'm going to be in charge of producing this podcast for you for this season. So me and a team of highly talented podcast elves are going to be editing and producing and publishing this podcast for you. So if you have any ideas or feedback or suggestions for guests or anything else really, then please do get in touch. Please email us. Our email address is ohbm.comcom at gmail.com. I'll put it on the screen here as well. The podcast itself can be found on many of your standard podcast platforms. If you found this, you already know at least one of them. But in an effort to reach a wider, more global audience, the podcast is now going to be released on Himalaya, so that it's going to be available in China. So if you're listening to this in China, fantastic, welcome to you. Also new this season, all of these podcasts are going to be available on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel now. All previous episodes are also on there, but now we're going to be in video form. Also new this season, because of this new video format, we've decided to showcase some brain art. OHBM has an enormous brain art sub-community, and the Brain Art Special Interest Group has very kindly provided those to us. And so we're going to try to showcase at least one piece of brain art at the end of every episode this season. So if you did submit brain art to the brain art exhibit at this year's annual meeting, then we're choosing art from that list, so that may feature at the end of these episodes. Before we begin this episode, I want to thank members of ohbm.comcom, or the communications committee, who are in charge of this podcast and who have made this podcast possible in the past and who continue to make it possible in the future, including but not limited to Kevin Setek, Rachel Stickland, Elizabeth Dupree, Niels Mullet, Stephanie Forkel, Katie Moran, Ekaterina Dobrokova, and Anastasia Brovkin. We also have a blog. If you go to ohbmbrainmappingblog.com, then you will see our blog, where we feature various articles, including recently we are featuring written interviews with some of this year's annual meeting's keynote speakers. What follows now is a little introductory episode in which Peter and I reflect about the podcast's past, episodes gone by, and also we look forward to what's new in Season 3, as well as having a little chat about science and science communication in general. I hope you enjoy the episode. I hope you enjoy the rest of the season. Thanks for being here. Have fun. Hi. So this is our first episode of Season 3 of Neurosalience. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing well. We took a little bit of a break, but we're going to start right up in Season 3, and we already have a bunch of interviews that are ready to go out. And I'm ready.
Excellent. I think a lot of people are looking forward to this. I'm certainly looking forward to this. I'm coming into this as a new podcast production lead, I guess. So it's a very exciting opportunity to work with you and to be involved with this. It's been it's really exciting.
Yeah, and it seems like we have a growing team of people that on OHBM.comcom. that will help out with production. And it looks like we, thanks to your idea, we have a slightly different platform. Instead of just basing it all on Zoom and audio, we have something slightly more professional.
So that's I guess the elephant in the room for anyone who is watching this on YouTube or in any video format. We are now in video. You can see our faces now, which is new, for better or for worse. It's it's exciting, and it's a new direction for the podcast. So I think it was Stephanie Forkel who was really in charge of she put all the previous episodes of the podcast on YouTube. They're all there to watch, but they're not video podcasts. It's just still the audio that people are used to. But from season 3 and onwards, I think you're asking permission from all of your guests that if they're happy to have their video recorded, and they will all go now on YouTube for people to watch. I should also highlight, though, that if you are listening to this on Anchor or on Spotify or whatever platform you normally listen to it on, nothing should change. Everything should all be the same. We're not going to be showing things on the video that make the audio completely nonsensical or anything like that, or we'll try not to. So for people who don't want it to change, it won't, but there's just a new platform for hopefully a new portion of the audience to enjoy.
Yeah, and potentially even the audio is going to be better because they have some extra sort of features that filter the audio properly and things like that. So
yeah, hopefully. So yeah, we've got new videos, we've got new music at the intro, we've got new production techniques. So hopefully this is going to look extremely professional and smooth and wonderful. So
yeah, great.
So yeah, I mean, I guess now that's the sort of production side of it. It's highlighting everything that's new, production-wise. And maybe I should just start off by asking you, Peter, like, how's it going? 2 years done, and this is the third year of podcast recording for you. And how's it going? How's it been?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, just as a quick recap, I mean, this sort of started at the beginning of COVID. I sort of had a brainstorm and with a number of people, and it actually originated with the scientific advisory board sort of saying, oh, we need to have be more engaged in some sense, but then it quickly transferred to the ComCom group, and they loved it, and I think they've been thinking about trying to have a podcast for a while, and I volunteered. I thought, okay, I guess it started with the thought that I have so many really good conversations with people in the field at meetings, and just a way of capturing that, because there's so much information that kind of comes out spontaneously that's I think really useful and interesting and engaging to listen to. So, but yeah, and initially I was naively thinking, oh yeah, it'll be great. I'll just talk to people, and it'll be and that's kind of what it is. But at the same time, I realized that it does involve a certain amount of preparation. I certainly don't want to look ridiculous not knowing what the person does, and so I do a lot of research. I look at their papers. I try to understand how it connects with current issues, and try to make it as engaging as possible. And yeah, it's a little bit of work, but I think I've sort of mastered the schedule of that, and I think maybe over time the listeners can probably judge for themselves. But I think I've gotten a little bit better. It's still pretty much of an amateur, but at the same time, I think in some sense that's a good thing, because I'm just another scientist who is trying to understand what people are doing, and we're all kind of in this together, I think. So yeah, and I've been really pleased with the fact that almost everyone immediately says yes to being interviewed. They really want to share what they want to do, what they do, and yeah, we've had some wonderful interviews, either about current issues or about the work that people are doing, and we're trying to make it as relevant as possible to not only the OHBM community, but even the general public too. We're trying to keep the pitch. Sometimes some podcasts get really into the weeds, but some of them are high level enough that they're just fun to listen to for anyone. So I try to somehow hit that balance various places, even during the interview as well. So yeah, it's been going great. Yeah, there's been a lot of good. We've had 42 episodes, I guess, from my last count, produced so far. Even for season 3, have already recorded 7 episodes. We even have coming out in season 3, I hope, the live version of our podcast that we tried at OHBM. So that was a fun one. It was very different challenges for me. I'm used to giving interviews like in the quiet of my room. And one thing I learned is that on the OHBM stage, it's very hard to hear what the guests are saying. So if some of my questions seemed a little bit tangential, it might be related to the fact that I didn't hear their answer.
We'll have that as a little side note on the in the introduction.
But anyway, I think it worked out really well, and it was on a really important topic with some really good people on the brain-wide association studies. And we had actually an interview. So we had at OHBM, we had an interview with people who were sort of outside of that study. I actually interviewed with a podcast that will be coming out as well of the co-authors of that paper, and that actually, I think that actually came out last season, and that was also a really, really good discussion.
It was a great discussion. That was one of the more recent episodes that I was involved in editing as well. So that's the whole reason I got involved in this. So I had excuses to listen to brilliant episodes like this, and I think it's really high up there in the rankings of the episodes as well. So a lot of people engaged with that, and I think that led quite nicely into the discussion at the annual meeting as well. So I think that was people like this sort of controversial topic as a theme for episodes. I think they perform quite well.
Yeah, we'll try to do more of those as well as we go along. Right. Some of the podcasts are just about the researcher themselves, but I always try to bring in controversial topics that they happen to be related. Their work might be related to.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that was better about season 2, and I think we're going to even continue to work on in season 3 is this variety of the types of episodes that we're showing. As you say, we've got episodes that are focused on the individual researchers or individual groups, and you've got controversial topics, you've got methods focused ones, you've got more clinically focused ones, and I think moving this forward, having interviews with more early career researchers, maybe have some sort of panel on. I don't want this to turn into a complete episode brainstorming session. We seem to be quite good at having those on occasion, but there's lots of ways that we can continue to improve who is being interviewed in the podcast. And also, I'm just going to plug it now as well, that I'll put an email address at the beginning of the episode. If you have ideas, if you want anyone in particular to be interviewed, or if you just have ideas for themes, then we're very open to having people submit ideas and suggestions for interviewees or topics.
Yeah, definitely. Any ideas, or else, right, if you missed the email at the beginning, I mean, you can always email myself as well. I respond to all the emails, and I think my email is pretty easily found online. So I'm very open and receptive to any. I really like the fact that some people actually want to be interviewed, and it helps a lot in terms of the engagement in the podcast. And so yeah, and also,
it's a fun process.
Yeah, it's a fun process, and also just to mention as well, I mean, I try to go. Sometimes I found that when I interview people that are doing research directly related to what I'm doing, I can't help myself but kind of go into the weeds, and sometimes it's a less good podcast, I think, for a lot of people. But the podcasts that go way outside my area of expertise, it's harder for me. But I think overall, I think it's sort of.
I mean, I was going to ask you this anyway. Like, how does obviously, if you're given, or if you've organized a podcast with someone who you've maybe known personally for a long time, who's in your field, and you know the details of their work, then that must be, well, yeah, maybe it's a more straightforward preparation process for you. But when you're given, or not when you're given, when you're planning a podcast with someone who is really not your field of expertise, how is that preparation process for you when you have to then?
Yeah, I just do my best in reading their papers and understanding them, and I'm sure my questions are at a slightly different level than someone who's an expert in what they're doing. A couple examples. For instance, a very early podcast, Danny Bassett. She, I know what she does, and but I'm not a modeler in that regard. So I was asking, I think, more either high level questions or questions that relate to how models relate to acquisition and what are the limits in terms of the acquisition. So I try to bring it into, maybe areas that in my mind are still somewhat open and unknown, but at the same time, not quite going into the weeds of modeling in that regard. So that's kind of what, and also, there's other people too. I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist by training. I think, it's funny actually, after, many years, many decades, and several decades in the field, even though you have an area of expertise that you got your PhD in, I think that everyone sort of becomes a generalist, especially in brain mapping. And for instance, cognitive neuroscience, I interviewed David Popple in one episode, and that was just fascinating because once again, I was asking a little bit more high level questions, and it just fostered a really, really, I think, good discussion. Of course, David's an amazing guest as well, so that always helps. But anyway,
That always makes your life easier, I'm sure.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know exactly what you mean, because about having to become a generalist. I feel relatively new to the OHBM community. I moved to McGill University, and it's really a central hub for. There's lots of people involved in the OHBM community there. I moved there just about a year and a half ago, and that's really when I started to become integrated with this field, even more so than during my PhD. And that's when I hadn't been to an OHBM annual meeting before that point, and really I'm starting. So my background is in structural neuroimaging, but I'm picking up more and more about cognitive neuroscience and functional imaging and methods and all these things that when you hear someone either on a podcast or at the annual meeting or wherever that might be, sort of speaking really passionately about their work in those fields, even though I may have no specific background or training in them, it's sort of inspiring and really, it makes you want to become a generalist, right? So all these things you can still learn.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the best scientists, the best work in OHBM is one that integrates, the best of the methods with the best questions from neuroscience. And, a lot of times people sometimes confine themselves unnecessarily to, you feel, really, I mean, what you get your PhD in is what you've studied intensely for, anywhere from, 3 to 5 years or whatever. But the fact is, as you go on in the field, you're always getting an education. And I think that really the best research is from people, from groups that integrate widely across the expertise related to brain mapping. I mean, the fact is that you really do need to be an expert in a lot of different things, and you have to be aware of the questions. So I'm more of a methodologist, and it's important to sort of always keep the questions in mind when you're developing methods. Otherwise, you lose the forest for the trees, and you might produce something that's great, but it's irrelevant. So
you do, and also, and when it comes to communicating your results to people, if like you say, if you're in a situation where you can't see the forest for the trees, it becomes very difficult to remember how to explain anything of what you do in detail that is understandable to anyone else who doesn't understand, at that same level, what it is you're doing. And
yes,
and so being able to explain it to methods to clinicians, or the relevance of methods to clinicians, or why fMRI should even be considered in clinical uses. Things like that. Those communication lines really break down if you don't have some sort of interdisciplinary training or just practice in doing that sort of thing. It's not a given. That skill isn't a given. It's really something which is quite tricky.
That's very true. And everyone has their blind spots. I mean, everyone has things that they're not considering with regard to the thing. And the only way to work those through is by communicating and having people give feedback that's clear and being open to trying to understand. So, I mean, I'm constantly doing that even with clinical applications, trying to, talking with physicians, saying, really understanding what they actually need. I'm constantly trying to make fMRI, for instance, more relevant. And, it's everything. It's not only just getting good images after some processing and, with super motivated volunteers. I mean, there's a lot of issues to actually make it clinically relevant. And so there's things like that.
Yeah. And to bring that back around, then that's why that's why podcasts like this, I feel, are quite important in just listening. If you listen to a season of Neurosalience, you will have such a variety of things, and even if even if it does get into the weeds of the details a bit, and that's not necessarily relevant to you, you may come away from that with an appreciation for this field, even if you don't, you're not necessarily going to go and read all the papers of the interviewee, or get, start doing those methods yourself. Maybe you will, but more than anything, you'll come away with an appreciation that this field exists. This is something that people are working on, and maybe you'll have a reference that you can go to if you want to know more about it.
Yes.
So shameless plug there, but I think that's it. It seemed relevant.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that's our goal, and to have it as engaging. And also, it's interesting. I haven't actually received that much feedback as to how the podcasts are. So I'd love anyone who's listening to this, just any feedback is useful, even if it's negative. I actually almost prefer the negative feedback, so that allows me to sort of evaluate things in a way that maybe I'm not seeing. So.
In theory, as academics, we're used to that. Negative feedback is we foster thick skins and don't take anything personally. But yeah, no, it's true. Like, positive feedback is great, but negative feedback is really where you highlight what can be improved. So exactly. No, I'm from a production side or from an interview side, whatever that might be. We're all willing to and welcoming feedback on the podcast for sure.
Yeah. And one feedback, and actually, this is something I'm constantly working on as well. This is not just a fMRI brain mapping podcast. This is everything that's related to OHBM. So all the modalities I'm trying to hit upon, all the types of modeling, all the applications. So once again, any ideas as to who to interview would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think one other idea we had. So maybe just to circle back to something we mentioned before. This podcast was set up during, I think, at the very beginning of the pandemic, right? It's really in the midst of lockdowns and quarantining and all that stuff. And it was, I imagine. So I wasn't involved with production at that time, but I imagine it was quite a useful resource for people who wanted to try to connect more with people, right? During that time when that was especially difficult. Now, of course, people are meeting in person again. Talks are happening in person, and it's a very different sort of new context, I guess, to have this podcast. And so do you feel like it's got has to have a different focus now, or how do you feel that this podcast will differ?
Well, it's interesting. I think the only difference, I think that will still be sort of online interviews for the most part, almost exclusively. But I think that there might be more options for instance, at conferences, meeting up and finding a room and interviewing people, and also certainly having podcasts from my office with people who visit. I work at the NIH. People who visit and whatever. That could be also something. I'm set up to do that as well, if necessary. So.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, anything. The more variety, the better, right? And I know, yeah, I think we also toyed with the idea of having some mics and going around on the ground at annual meetings going forward, and maybe getting thoughts on what people are finding interesting, what they like about the conference, and sharing some snippets of the highlights, which is, I guess, particularly useful for people who can't attend in person as well, just to get a sense of what it's like there on the day.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a great idea. I'd love to do that as well. So yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I guess just another question for you really is looking back on season 2. Yeah, how do you have any particular highlights from that season that stand out to you? Do you have any favorite episodes yourself that you recorded?
Yeah. Just looking back I mean, they were all really good and unique. I really particularly liked once again, just to mention the one that was released on, I guess, June 15th, the Brain-Wide Association study episode, which really hit on some clarifying concepts of can we use BUS clinically? What are the issues? Why does it need 2,000 subjects? Does this mean the end of trying to look for biomarkers or things like that? So yeah, that was a great one. Um, uh, some that just pop out that I remember really enjoying the conversation was one with Randy Macintosh, who does dynamic modeling. That was a sort of a really nice sort of overview of modeling multimodal data and his work. We even had a slightly different uh, uh, episode where we took a book by Grace Lindsay on modeling the mind uh, and models of the mind. I think it was the title, and we interviewed her, and I even had a guest interview. A guest joined me to help interview her because he was sort of leading a book club here at the NIH. And so that was different. We might do more of those with people who have written specific books. One fun episode for me was episode 13, looking at a deep history of fMRI. So basically, it was me and all of my old timer buddies, sort of just going over the old days of how things got started. And what's kind of cool about that is that we're all, maybe at the very beginning, we didn't know each other, and it was sort of like this competition. But the fact is, in science, you really, it's not a zero sum game, and the competition is all sort of synergistic, and everyone ends up understanding that. And so we're all really good friends, and we're really good friends. We have a ton of respect for each other, and that was a lot of fun. Uh, there was a great interview with Anastasia Brovkin on her pioneering work with diffusion imaging and diffusion processing. In season 2, early on, I interviewed Jack Gallant twice.
Yes.
And it was very different tones. The first one, Jack is an amazing person to interview because he just tells it like it is. And a lot of times when person goes on a podcast, they sort of couch their opinions, and they kind of are very careful in what they say. Jack is not, and
Okay.
that was great. The first episode, I barely could get a word in edgewise. He was just going. And the second episode was also different. It was talking about potential of fMRI and things like that, and that was more of a back and forth. But they were really fun episodes, I think, to listen to. First one, honestly, I was almost a little frustrated because I'm in my amateur podcast host mindset. I wanted to sort of control the conversation a little bit and guide it, and there was no controlling the conversation in that first one.
That's when you learn to just let go of the reins and see where
Yeah,
the
you just were
goes,
like,
right?
okay, you're just going, and I figured I'd have another one where maybe things were a little bit more.
But I think it shows. I mean, I'm just looking at the stats for the episodes now. Those 2 episodes are up there at the front. I think people must have enjoyed that sort of I don't know, you having to improvise on the spot and just seeing where it goes.
Yeah. It was fun. It was fun, and actually, a lot of it is improvisation. I mean, it's not really all that scripted. And that's actually one of the things I do in my preparation for the podcast. I sort of come up with a list of questions, and I send it to them like a couple of days ahead of time so they can look at it, and then we just kind of pick and choose as we go along. And so it works out pretty well as far as that's concerned. But and also one other highlight I just want to emphasize is Eric Wong. He's not really completely in the field. He is a physicist at UC San Diego, and he was my colleague when we first started fMRI, and he was also kind of my mentor in some regard. It was sort of an interesting relationship. I mean, Jim Hyde was my mentor, and officially, but Eric and I were kind of like the team that got things going, and Eric pretty much taught me everything I know about fMRI or MRI, and he got things. He really was essential. So I had fun interviewing him as well, and it's interesting. He's a physicist who really pioneered a lot of aspects of gradient coils and arterial spin labeling and things like that. But now he's decided to jump into the world of theoretical neuroscience. And so he's trying to make models of cognition. And he's finding that it's really hard to penetrate that field if you're, sort of an outsider. Like with any of these disciplines, it's very tough to get over that wall because people don't know you and they don't think don't know really what you're doing is either crazy or whatever. There's a lot of it's not just the work; it's sort of like the social aspect of it and people knowing people. That's how we are. I mean, that's what we're all people ultimately.
Exactly. Yeah. No, we're all more than just a sort of list of authors on a paper, right? That's just something which I'm becoming familiar with now, having actually been to annual meetings and being more involved with the community, is really seeing the people side of the science. And I think it makes it so much more accessible, I guess. Also, it makes reading papers much more engaging when I know, well, even if I don't know them personally, if I've met them or if I've seen a talk by them, or if I've seen an interview by them, you get that personal side, and so I think it also helps it almost helps in critiquing the work more in a sort of, or receiving feedback more if you know who it's from, or you think it's come from a community who, for the most part, mean well, and and they just want to get the best science out of this process.
Yeah, I completely agree. There really is the human side that people have to learn, that we're all kind of struggling. We're all struggling with various time constraints and understanding the literature and keeping on top of things and coming up with new ideas. And that's a sort of a human aspect to all this. It's not just that the work is sort of works itself through. It's like there's a human side to it. And
it's not just a machine that takes along and spits out results. And there's real life people doing this stuff, and it's nice to get to know the people doing it.
Yes, yeah, and it's fun to know what their mindset is. People who are really, and that's actually another thing I want to emphasize too, is that I interview a lot of the leaders in the field, I really want to interview more of the postdocs and students as well, to sort of get their perspective and to just share their, sort of help make a shared experience among all the people that have different struggles at their stage of their career. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like if if watching this podcast, if you know people who if either you want to come on the podcast and you think you want to be a guest, or if you know other colleagues or other early career researchers who want to take part, then again it comes back to just send us an email, and we'll try and get you on if time allows. I think it'd be a really great opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just mention really quickly, at least the people that are queued up, that something to look forward to. Without revealing all the cards, but already I've interviewed, and I don't know what order these will necessarily come out in, but I've interviewed Bharat Biswal, the pioneer in resting state fMRI. that was a really fun interview about a little bit of the history, a little bit of the current issues, and looking at spontaneous fMRI signal. Mikhail Ramat, also I interviewed. She's a pioneer in real-time feedback, and really, really fascinating stuff on using sort of implicit learning, where you're not even aware that your brain is being changed. Some of her results are really compelling. I interviewed Sanji Kim, and that was an example of one where Sanji is sort of almost very much a compatriot with me. So that was just basically, I really, he pioneered so much in fMRI contrast mechanisms, and I just sort of went through on all the issues of fMRI contrast mechanisms with him. And so that was a little bit in the weeds, but it was a lot of fun and very comprehensive. Arno Willinger from the Max Planck Institute, I interviewed him. We also interviewed the ComCom group that will be coming out. Jeff Binder is a clinician who does fMRI of language, but he's also expanding it out. Really rigorous scientist, but also a clinician. So talking about the interface between fMRI and clinical applications. And Lily Mojica Parodi, some of you may not know her, but maybe you do. She's been engaged in OHBM, and she actually studies, she models the fMRI signal, but she also looks at metabolic, basically her idea is that, as the brain ages, the metabolism changes. And so looking at metabolic relationships of brain activity with fMRI signal. And she's very much a proponent of things like a ketogenic diet that uses other sources of energy to reduce aging and things like that. So anyway, those are what you have to look forward to so far. I have yet to invite the rest of the season. We usually have like 20 episodes a season. So looking forward to this.
I think there's a lot of really cool stuff coming up in season 3. I think it sounds good. Like I said, the whole reason I volunteered to help with this production is that it means that it forces me to put the time aside and really get more aware of all the work that's going on, so I don't get too in my own head. It's well worth doing.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun, and it's fun for me, and hopefully you enjoy listening to it as well. So,
all right, excellent. Unless there's anything else you want to add, Peter, then that's all the questions I have for you.
Not really. No, it's. I think I'm excited about the next season, and that's about it. Just keep on listening. Give us ideas as to how to. We advertise a lot of our episodes on Twitter, and we're looking for other types of ways of spreading the word of our podcast. So, any ideas for that would be welcome as well.
Yeah, all right. And thank you to you for doing this as well. We appreciate it. It's a great podcast, and thanks for being the host, I guess. And
yeah, well, it's like I said, it's fun for me. It's some work, but I get a lot out of it myself. I get one episode at a time. I get educated on some aspects of the field. So I consider it actually as part of my work of trying to be a good principal investigator and keep up on things. So.
Of your wholesome academic life.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks very much.
All right. Well, thank you, and look forward to this next season. Thanks.
All right.